He killed a man for touching me, and I didn't even know his name. That night still lives beneath my skin, whispering through my blood like the aftertaste of smoke that refuses to fade. I had gone to that club only because I was tired of the silence, tired of hearing my own thoughts echo against the walls of my tiny apartment, tired of pretending that the loneliness didn't feel like drowning in slow motion. My best friend, Camille, had begged me to come. "Just one drink," she'd said. "You work too much, Izzy. You need to feel something again." She didn't know how right she was, though I wish to God she hadn't been. The place was called La Note Nera, the kind of club that doesn't have a sign because the people who belong there don't need one. It was all black glass, gold accents, and low, seductive lighting that made everyone look more beautiful and more dangerous at the same time. The air smelled of expensive cologne, bourbon, and something darker. Power, maybe. There was a live band tucked into a velvet corner, playing a slow jazz tune that dripped like honey over everything it touched. I remember thinking the place felt like a sin wrapped in silk. Camille disappeared into the crowd within 10 minutes, laughing with someone who looked like he owned half of Italy, and I was left standing near the bar, clutching my drink like a lifeline. I'm not the kind of woman who fits easily into places like that. I restore paintings for a living, quiet, forgotten art that speaks in whispers, and I dress the same way, modestly, carefully, as if my body is a secret no one's earned the right to uncover. So I stayed near the shadows, tracing the rim of my glass, pretending I wasn't completely out of place. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the far corner, surrounded by men who looked like bodyguards, but carried themselves more like wolves waiting for his command. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room in a way that made everyone else shrink without realizing it. He had the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. Sharp jaw, dark hair that brushed his collar, eyes the color of black coffee, steady and unyielding. When he glanced in my direction just for a second, it felt like being caught in a current too strong to fight. I told myself I imagined it, that he was looking at someone else, someone who belonged there. But then I saw one of the men near him lean in, whisper something in his ear, and his gaze flicked back to me, colder this time. It wasn't attraction, it was assessment, calculation, a kind of silent question that made the fine hairs on my arms rise. I turned away, pretending to check my phone, pretending that my pulse wasn't skipping like a broken record. I should have left then. Instead, a man brushed against me, close enough that I could smell the sour tang of whiskey on his breath. He smiled, the kind of smile that tries to own you before it even knows your name. I tried to step back, but he caught my wrist, not hard at first, just possessive. "You're too beautiful to be alone," he said, leaning closer, and before I could answer, his fingers dug in deeper, bruising. I told him to let go, my voice shaking but firm, and he laughed, actually laughed, like I was a child making a demand she couldn't enforce. Then everything happened at once. The man's laughter stopped, cut short by the sound of glass shattering. Someone grabbed him from behind, too fast for me to see who, and slammed him face first onto the bar. The music stopped mid-note. A heartbeat later, the man who'd been touching me was on his knees, blood pouring from his nose, and the dark-eyed stranger stood over him, calm, controlled, his expression unreadable except for the faintest hint of disdain. He spoke in a low voice, not shouting, not even angry, just final. I didn't understand the words at first. They were Italian, but the tone needed no translation. The man on the floor started begging. The stranger didn't move. He just looked at him for a long, terrible moment, then pulled a small, sleek pistol from inside his jacket and fired once. The sound wasn't loud. It was almost quiet, like a sigh. The man crumpled, and the smell of gunpowder mingled with perfume and fear. Someone screamed. People scattered. But I couldn't move. He turned his gaze back to me, and the world narrowed until there was nothing but the two of us. His eyes weren't cruel, though they should have been. They were steady, searching, almost sorrowful. He took a step closer, holstering the weapon with the ease of someone who's done it too many times before. "You shouldn't have seen that, Bella," he said, his voice smooth and deep, the kind that doesn't need to rise to command attention. "Now I can't let you go." I wanted to run, but my legs refused to listen. His men surrounded us, blocking every exit, their faces impassive, professional, as if this was nothing more than routine. He gestured, and two of them dragged the body away without a word. The bartender resumed cleaning broken glass like it had all been staged. Maybe it had. Maybe the whole thing had been some twisted performance, and I'd stumbled onto the stage by accident. He stopped in front of me. So close I could see the faint scar beneath his jaw, the way his eyes softened just slightly when he noticed I was shaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I managed to whisper, "Who are you?" He tilted his head, studying me as if deciding how much truth I could handle. "Someone who doesn't like to be touched without permission." His voice was velvet over steel. I should have screamed, should have fought, should have done something, but instead I stood there locked in the strange gravity that held between us. He smelled faintly of smoke and something darker. Gun oil, maybe. And when he brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch was gentle, almost reverent, completely at odds with the violence I'd just witnessed. "What do you want from me?" I asked, barely breathing. He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "To keep you safe, even if it means keeping you." I didn't remember much after that. Someone pressed a cloth to my mouth. The world spun and fell away. My last memory was his voice, low and certain, saying something in Italian that I couldn't understand. When I woke, the world was quieter. The air smelled of cedar and leather instead of liquor and blood. I was lying in a bed too large, too soft, surrounded by darkness and unfamiliar walls. For a moment, I thought it was a dream, one of those strange, vivid nightmares that linger after dawn. But then I saw the shadow moving in the doorway, tall and still, watching me with those same unreadable eyes. "Where am I?" I whispered, my throat raw. His answer came like a vow. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere no one can touch you again." And as his silhouette turned and disappeared into the dim hall, I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. The man who had saved me, the man who had killed for me, was not going to let me go. And that, I would soon learn, was only the beginning. When I woke again, the world was quieter. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you breathe. Like the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting for you to remember where you are and why your heart is beating so fast. The sheets beneath me were soft. Far too soft. The kind of luxury that doesn't belong to ordinary people. And as I blinked against the dim light filtering through thick curtains, it struck me that I wasn't in my apartment, or any hospital, or anywhere that made sense. I was in a room that looked like it had been stolen from a dream. Dark wood, marble floors, paintings with eyes that seemed to follow me. And the faint scent of smoke and cedar lingered in the air, like a memory I couldn't quite place. I sat up slowly, every muscle aching. And it was only when the blanket slipped from my shoulders that I realized someone had changed my clothes. I was wearing a silk nightgown, black, the kind of thing I would never buy for myself. And that single detail made my skin crawl in a way that had nothing to do with fear of danger and everything to do with fear of being known too well. There was a tray on the bedside table, fresh fruit, coffee, a glass of water that caught the morning light. And for a moment I just stared at it, wondering how something so normal could exist in a place that felt like a secret carved out of the world. Then I heard the door open. He didn't knock, of course. Men like him don't knock. They enter a room the way a storm enters the sky. Inevitable, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. He stood there in the doorway, dressed in black slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, exposing strong forearms marked by faint scars that told stories I didn't want to know. His dark hair was slightly damp, and he smelled faintly of soap and smoke, that same scent that had haunted my sleep. His presence filled the room before he even spoke, and though I tried to hold his gaze, I found myself looking away first, because there was something in his eyes that made me feel like he could see every thought I didn't want to say out loud. "You're awake," he said, his voice smooth, unhurried, carrying that quiet authority that didn't need to be proven. I wasn't sure how long the sedative would last. My throat was dry, my voice rough. "You drugged me." He didn't flinch, didn't even look guilty. "You fainted. My men thought it best to let you rest." I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't belong to me. "You shot a man in front of me, kidnapped me, and then tucked me into bed. Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" He stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might smile, but he didn't. "Would you rather I left you where you were?" There were other eyes that night. The man who touched you was not acting alone. You were seen. That makes you a target. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. A target. I wasn't someone who existed in worlds where people became targets. I fixed paintings, not lives. I paid my rent late. I went to sleep alone with the TV humming for company. But as I looked at him, his calm, his certainty, his terrifying stillness, I realized that whatever life I'd had before that night was already gone. "Who are you?" I asked. His answer came with the weight of inevitability. "Adrian DeLuca." The name landed like a thunderclap. I'd heard it before, in whispers, in headlines that hinted but never said too much, in the kind of stories that made people lower their voices and look over their shoulders. Adrian DeLuca, the youngest head of the DeLuca syndicate, the man who turned a blood-soaked inheritance into an empire worth billions, the ghost behind a dozen unsolved crimes and 100 rumors. And now, somehow, he was standing in front of me, telling me that I belonged to his world whether I wanted to or not. "What do you want from me?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. He came closer, stopping just an arm's length away, and when he spoke, his words were low, deliberate, like he wanted me to feel each one. "To keep you alive." "Alive?" I repeated. "I didn't ask you to save me." "No," he said softly, "but I did it anyway." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. There was no arrogance in it, no demand for gratitude, just a quiet conviction that scared me more than any threat could. I wanted to hate him, to scream at him. But the truth was more complicated, more dangerous. Because even as fear coiled in my chest, there was another feeling creeping in beneath it. Something I didn't want to name. Curiosity, maybe. Or that terrible, forbidden pull toward the man who'd looked at me like I was something, worth breaking his rules for. He turned, gesturing toward the window. "You're safe here. No one outside these walls knows where you are. You'll stay until I decide it's safe for you to leave." The words landed like chains disguised as protection. "You decide? So I'm your prisoner now?" He looked at me then, really looked, and for a second his mask cracked. "If that's what you want to call it." I stood, trembling, the silk clinging to my legs. "I want to go home." "You can't. Can't or won't let me?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was with the quiet finality of a man who doesn't believe in compromise. "Both." Something inside me snapped, the fragile thread of politeness and fear unraveling all at once. "You don't get to make that choice for me," I said, my voice breaking, my hands shaking. "You don't even know me." He took a slow step forward, the air between us thickening until it felt like I was breathing through smoke. "You're wrong," he said, his voice almost tender now. "I knew you the moment I saw you. I knew the way you looked at the world, like you wanted to believe it was still beautiful. I haven't seen that in years. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. There was something unbearably lonely in his eyes, something that whispered of loss and guilt, and too many nights spent watching ghosts instead of sleeping. I wanted to ask him why he cared, why he'd risk everything for a stranger. But before I could, the door opened again, and one of his men entered. Tall, broad, with the kind of expression that said he'd seen too much and cared too little. "Boss," the man said, his accent thick. "We found another one near the docks. They were asking about the girl." Adrian's expression changed, hardened, and for the first time I saw the man the world feared, the one who could order death as easily as most people order coffee. "Handle it," he said, and when the man nodded and left, Adrian turned back to me, his voice soft again. Too soft. "Do you see now? The moment you walked into that club, your life stopped belonging to you. You're in my world now, Isabella. And in my world, protection always comes with a price." I wanted to tell him that I didn't want his protection, that I'd rather take my chances with the unknown than live in a gilded cage, but the words caught in my throat. Because behind his warning, I could hear something else. Fear, not for himself, but for me. And that somehow was more terrifying than all the rest. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the quiet gravity that pulled me in despite every instinct screaming to stay away. "You'll have everything you need," he murmured, "but don't mistake comfort for freedom." Then he left, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like the sealing of fate. I sank onto the bed, staring at the closed door, my pulse still unsteady. The air in the room felt thicker now, heavier, like the walls were closing in. And even though I was surrounded by luxury, silk sheets, golden light, soft music somewhere in the distance, it felt more like a prison than any cell could ever be. Somewhere deep inside, a single thought began to form, cold and clear and dangerous. If I couldn't leave, then I would find another way out. And maybe, just maybe, I would find out who Adrian DeLuca really was beneath all that calm and all that power. Because men like him don't save women like me for nothing. The first time I saw the dining room, I understood that beauty could be a kind of weapon, sharp and deliberate, meant to dazzle you into forgetting you were surrounded by danger. It stretched out before me like a scene from another life. Golden light from crystal chandeliers spilling across a table so long it looked endless, polished silver gleaming beside black porcelain plates, candles flickering in tall holders shaped like twisted vines. It was a setting fit for royalty, but the air held a tension that made my skin prickle, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Adrian stood at the head of the table, already dressed in a black suit that fit him like sin itself, his tie undone, his sleeves rolled back just enough to make him look both dangerous and human. Around him, men moved with silent precision, his lieutenants, his soldiers, his shadows, each one carefully composed, yet watchful, like wolves disguised as men, waiting for the signal to bare their teeth. I was brought there by a woman named Marta, who I had learned was the housekeeper, though the title didn't do her justice. She was in her 50s, strong-shouldered and quiet, with eyes that had seen too much but still held a trace of softness. When she came to my room that evening, she carried a dress, a deep emerald silk that caught the light like water, and told me in her calm, clipped tone that the Signore requests your presence for dinner. I almost refused. Every part of me wanted to slam the door, to scream that I wasn't his guest, that I wasn't a piece of his world to be displayed like one of his priceless artifacts. But curiosity, that treacherous, shimmering thing, betrayed me. A part of me wanted to see, to understand the man who had stolen my freedom with one soft-spoken promise. So I wore the dress. Marta helped me zip it, smoothing the fabric with a kind of reverence that made me wonder how many women she'd done this for before me. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked like someone else. Someone braver. Someone dangerous. The silk clung to me in ways that made my pulse skip. And for the first time, I realized that this world didn't just trap you with fear. It seduced you, whispering that maybe you belonged here if you could just learn how to stop trembling. When I entered the dining room, every head turned, and for a brief, breathless moment, the sound of conversation ceased entirely. Adrian's gaze found me instantly, pinning me where I stood, and I felt the weight of his attention like a hand against my skin. He said nothing, just gestured to the seat beside him, and I walked forward on unsteady legs, feeling the eyes of his men track my every move. As I sat down, I could feel their curiosity. Who was this woman who had appeared out of nowhere, who sat beside their boss like she belonged there? I didn't belong, of course. And yet, for that moment, I played the part, keeping my back straight, my face calm, pretending I wasn't shaking beneath the tablecloth. Dinner began in silence, broken only by the faint clinking of silver and glass. The food was exquisite. Truffle risotto, seared lamb, rich red wine. But I tasted none of it. Every sense was tuned to him, to the small, almost imperceptible gestures that seemed to control the entire room. When he spoke, the others leaned in. When he paused, they waited. It was power without effort, the kind that didn't need to shout. At one point, a man to Adrian's left, tall, broad, with a cruel kind of smile, leaned toward me. "So," he said, his voice oily, "you're the one who made the boss forget his dinner that night." I stiffened, unsure how to answer, but Adrian spoke before I could. "Careful, Marco," he said quietly, his tone soft as silk, but carrying the unmistakable chill of warning. The last man who touched what wasn't his learned how permanent my lessons can be. Laughter rippled through the table, low and nervous, but Marco only smirked, raising his glass in mock salute. "Of course, boss. Just making conversation." Adrian's eyes didn't leave him, though his smile was polite. "Then find a better topic." The air thickened again, and for a long moment no one spoke. I could feel the pulse in my throat, could hear my own heartbeat over the clinking of cutlery, and though I wanted to look away, my gaze kept drifting back to Adrian. There was something mesmerizing about him. This man who could terrify a room with a whisper, who could command death with a glance, and yet sit beside me with the calm composure of someone who might offer me a second glass of wine. At some point, he leaned slightly toward me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You don't have to be afraid of them," he murmured. "They only bite when I tell them to." I turned my head, meeting his gaze. "That's not reassuring," I whispered back. The corner of his mouth curved in what might have been amusement. It wasn't meant to be. The rest of the evening blurred into fragments, the laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes, the coded language woven through casual remarks, the way Adrian's hand brushed against mine once, deliberately, like a promise or a test. I found myself studying him, not just the power but the restraint, the way his eyes softened whenever he looked at me, though everything else about him was made of iron and control. When dessert arrived, dark chocolate mousse with gold dust that felt like a mockery of simplicity, Adrian dismissed his men with a quiet wave. One by one, they rose, nodded, and disappeared through the side door until only the two of us remained. The room seemed to exhale, and for the first time that night, the silence felt intimate instead of dangerous. He poured me another glass of wine, his fingers brushing mine as he handed it over, and the touch sent a shiver through me that I couldn't disguise. "Why am I here?" I asked finally, the question that had been burning since the moment I opened my eyes in his house. He didn't answer immediately. He swirled his wine, watching the liquid catch the light, then looked at me with that unreadable expression. "Because you saw something you shouldn't have. Because I can't risk them finding you. Because—" He paused, searching for the right word, his jaw tightening slightly. Because you remind me of something I thought I'd forgotten. What's that? Peace. The word fell between us like a confession. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, and I wondered if he even realized what he'd said. There was a sadness in his voice, buried deep beneath the steel, and I felt something inside me shift, something I didn't want to name. Then from somewhere in the house, a sharp sound shattered the stillness. The distant crack of glass breaking, followed by raised voices. Adrian stood instantly, his chair scraping back across the marble, his entire body coiled and alert. "What is it?" I asked, rising halfway to my feet. He turned to me, his eyes suddenly darker, the softness gone. "Stay here," he said. "Do not move." Before I could protest, he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving me alone in the golden light of the dining room that suddenly felt colder, emptier, and far too big. For a long time, I stood there listening, to the footsteps echoing down the hall, to the muffled voices outside, to the way the house seemed to breathe differently now, tense and expectant. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a whisper of movement behind one of the heavy curtains near the far wall. Someone was there, hiding, watching. My breath caught, the wine glass trembling in my hand, and in that instant, I realized something with terrible clarity. Adrian might have been the devil himself, but at least with him, I knew where the danger came from. Whatever was waiting in the shadows now, this was something else entirely. The moment I realized there was someone hiding behind the curtain, time seemed to slow, every heartbeat stretching into something long and uneven, like the ticking of a clock buried underwater. Muffled but relentless. And I knew, with the kind of instinct that lives deep in your bones, that whatever waited there wasn't supposed to be. The air shifted, heavier now, the golden light from the candles flickering in, strange rhythms, throwing long shadows that danced across the marble like they were alive. I wanted to call for Adrian, to scream, but fear caught my throat before the sound could escape. And instead I just stood there, frozen between the world I'd known and the one I was quickly realizing had no mercy for innocence. The curtain rustled again, soft but deliberate, and that small sound, the whisper of fabric moving, was somehow worse than any gunshot, because it was careful, controlled, the kind of movement that belonged to someone who didn't want to be seen but had no fear of being caught. My fingers tightened around the stem of the glass until it slipped from my hand, shattering against the floor, and for a heartbeat everything stilled. Then the curtain moved, and a man stepped out. He wasn't one of Adrian's men, that much I could tell immediately. His suit was too clean, too polished, his movements too precise. He looked like he belonged in an office boardroom, not a world of shadows and guns. His hair was slicked back, his face pale and composed. But his eyes were wrong. Cold. Empty. "You shouldn't be here," I managed, my voice small but steady enough to hide the tremor that wanted to break through. He smiled, the kind of smile that meant nothing. A stretch of lips without warmth. "Neither should you, Miss Romano." The sound of my name from his mouth made something inside me twist. He knew me. I didn't know how, but he did. "Who are you?" I asked, backing up a step, my heel brushing against the edge of the table. He tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting problem, not a person. "Someone who's been looking for you. You have something I need." Before I could ask what, the door burst open, and Adrian was there. Silent, fast, a shadow turned to flesh. His gun was drawn before the man could even move, and for the first time I saw rage in him. Not the calm, dangerous control he wore like armor, but pure, visceral fury. "Who sent you?" Adrian's voice was quiet. Too quiet. And that made it worse. The intruder raised his hand slowly, the faintest smirk curling his lips. You know who? Adrian's expression didn't change, but the air around him did, thickening, darkening, like the whole room had taken on his anger. You came into my home, he said, his words deliberate, slow, deadly. You breathed my air. You looked at her. That was your last mistake. And then there was no more talking. The shot came so fast I didn't have time to blink. The man fell, his body hitting the marble with a dull, final sound that echoed far longer than it should have. I should have screamed. I didn't. Maybe I was past screaming. Maybe part of me had already accepted that this was my life now. A place where death arrived as easily as silence, where men like Adrian killed as casually as others might exhale. He turned toward me, the gun still warm in his hand, his face unreadable. Are you hurt? I shook my head, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Who was he? Adrian glanced down at the body, then back at me. A messenger and a fool. He called for his men, and within seconds the room was filled again. Shadows moving with grim efficiency, dragging the body away, wiping blood from the marble, resetting the world as if nothing had happened. It was terrifying how quickly order returned. Within minutes, there was no trace of what I'd just seen. The only thing left was the faint smell of gunpowder and the pounding of my own heart. When we were alone again, I whispered, "He knew my name." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yes." "How? Why would anyone be looking for me?" For the first time since I'd met him, he hesitated. That single pause, small and almost invisible, told me more than any words could. "Adrian," I pressed, "tell me." He exhaled slowly, his hand sliding through his hair, the gesture strangely human, almost weary. "Your father," he said finally, and the name hit me like a blade to the chest. "Your father wasn't the man you think he was." My breath caught, 1,000 old memories colliding at once. The quiet man who used to hum while fixing watches at the kitchen table. The one who disappeared when I was 15 without a word, leaving behind nothing but debts and silence. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Adrian's gaze was steady, unflinching. "He worked for us. Years ago. Before I took over. When my father was still alive. Your father was one of his best men." I shook my head. "No, that's impossible. My father wasn't... He couldn't have. He was just... A good man?" Adrian interrupted softly. "Maybe he was. Once. But this life doesn't let good men stay that way." The room tilted, the air thick with things I didn't want to believe. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and because I wasn't ready to say it." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something break behind his calm, something that looked almost like guilt. "When I saw you that night in the club, I knew who you were the moment you said your name. I didn't tell you because I needed to make sure it wouldn't put you in danger." My voice trembled. "And now?" "Now it's too late for lies." The truth settled between us like dust, heavy, inescapable. I wanted to hate him for keeping it from me, but the hatred wouldn't come. Instead, there was only confusion, an ache that spread through my chest like slow fire. I walked toward the window, needing space, needing air, but the sight outside only reminded me of where I was, the sprawling estate surrounded by stone walls and iron gates, a kingdom of isolation ruled by a man who had just confessed to knowing the secrets of my blood. "You said my father worked for you," I said, turning back to him. "What happened to him?" Adrian's silence was an answer in itself. "Tell me," I demanded, my voice sharp now, my hands trembling. He took a slow breath. "He died. On a job my father sent him on. It was supposed to be simple. It wasn't. There was an ambush. He never came back." I swallowed hard, the edges of grief and anger cutting through each other, until I couldn't tell which hurt more. And you never thought to tell his family? Adrian's eyes flickered. There were reasons, dangerous ones. I laughed, bitter and small. There are always reasons with you, aren't there? Always something you can't say, some secret that keeps you safe while the rest of us live with ghosts. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between us was too loud, filled with all the things neither of us could fix. Finally, I whispered, "You're telling me my father was part of this world, that he died because of it, and now I'm trapped in it too." Adrian took a step closer, his voice soft, raw. "You're not trapped, Isabella. You're protected." I looked up at him, tears burning my eyes but refusing to fall. There's no difference. He reached for me then, slowly, carefully, as if afraid I'd disappear if he touched me. His fingers brushed my cheek, his thumb tracing the edge of my jaw, and though every instinct told me to pull away, I didn't. I couldn't. "I didn't mean for you to be part of this," he said quietly. "But now that you are, I'll never let them touch you." "Who's them?" I whispered. "The ones who killed your father," he said, his eyes dark and distant. "And the ones who will come for you next." The words hung in the air like a storm about to break. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far away, low and heavy, as if the world itself had heard him. And in that moment, standing in his house filled with ghosts and lies, I realized something terrifyingly clear. I had spent my whole life trying to escape my father's shadow, only to find that I'd been walking straight back into it. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of Adrian, though I should have been, but because the truth had rewritten everything I thought I knew about my life, turning memory into a weapon, slicing through the fragile illusion that my father had been the gentle, broken man who loved old watches and Sunday dinners. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner felt like a reminder that the past doesn't die just because we pretend it does. It waits, patient and cruel, until someone like Adrian pulls it back into the light. The storm outside hadn't stopped since he told me. Rain battered the windows in wild, uneven rhythms, thunder growling like some restless god circling above. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows on the floor, replaying his words again and again until they blurred into something that sounded like fate. "Your father worked for us. He died on a job. They'll come for you next." Every sentence was a chain, and I could feel them tightening around me one by one. At some point, I realized I wasn't alone. He was there, Adrian, standing by the window, a dark shape cut against the faint flicker of lightning, his shoulders tense, his face half in shadow. He hadn't said a word since he left me earlier, hadn't tried to offer comfort or explanation, just stayed there like some guardian carved out of stone, too proud to admit he was watching over me. "You don't sleep much, do you?" I asked finally, my voice low, breaking the silence like a match struck in the dark. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "Sleep is for men who have nothing to lose." "And you?" His gaze flicked to me, then back to the window. "I lost that luxury a long time ago." Something in the way he said it made my heart tighten, not with pity exactly, but with an ache I didn't know how to name. He wasn't a man built for softness, and yet there were moments, small, unguarded ones, where I saw it, like cracks in the armor he wore so well. "Tell me about them," I said after a moment. "The people who killed my father." He hesitated, then sighed, turning fully toward me, leaning against the window frame with his arms crossed. "They were part of a rival family, Lorenzo Marconi's men. My father and Marconi had an agreement once, a fragile one. Your father was sent to deliver a message. He never came back. My father thought it was betrayal. Marconi said it was punishment. It started a war that nearly destroyed both families." "Punishment for what?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Adrian's jaw tightened. For trying to leave. The words struck me like a blow. You mean my father tried to get out? Yes. He wanted a normal life. For you. For your mother. But in this world, walking away isn't something you're allowed to do. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. So he died because he wanted to protect us. Adrian nodded, slow and heavy. He died because he believed he could outrun the past. And now they think I'm a way to finish what he started. His silence was the only answer I needed. For a while, we didn't speak. The storm filled the room, a restless soundtrack to the thoughts neither of us could quiet. When I finally looked up, he was watching me again. His expression softer now, the sharp edges dulled by something that looked dangerously like tenderness. You don't have to be afraid, he said quietly. As long as you're under my roof, no one will touch you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of it. The idea that the man who had kidnapped me, confessed to knowing my father's death, and built an empire on blood could talk about safety like it was something simple. Your roof is a prison, Adrian. His lips curved slightly, though there was no humor in it. Maybe. But it's the kind of prison that keeps you alive. Alive isn't the same as free. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just in front of me, his presence swallowing the air. Freedom is an illusion, Isabella. Everyone answers to something. Fear, loyalty, love, revenge. The only question is which one owns you. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words caught somewhere between my throat and my heart. And instead I just looked at him. Really looked. And saw a man who carried the weight of 1,000 choices on his shoulders, each one heavier than the last. Then somewhere in the distance, a sharp sound cut through the rain, a single muffled explosion that shook the glass panes and sent a tremor through the floor. Adrian's head snapped toward the window, his entire body going rigid, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun holstered beneath his jacket. What was that? I breathed. He didn't answer immediately. He was already moving, fast and purposeful, his voice sharp as he barked something in Italian into the small earpiece I hadn't noticed before. A few moments later, a reply came through. Urgent, garbled, tense. Stay here, he ordered, already halfway to the door. Adrian, stay here. And then he was gone. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the relentless pounding of the rain. I tried to sit still, to obey, but fear and curiosity are twin devils, and they don't listen to reason. After what felt like an eternity, I stood, crossing to the window. Outside, the night was alive with chaos, flashes of headlights, shouts, the distant crack of gunfire. The courtyard that had looked so peaceful earlier now burned with movement. My stomach turned to ice. They were here. Whoever they were. I ran to the door, but before I could reach it, it burst open, and one of Adrian's men stumbled inside, blood on his sleeve, panic in his eyes. Miss, we have to move. Now. Where's Adrian? I demanded. He's handling it, the man said, grabbing my arm. But they've breached the outer wall. The words barely registered before he was pulling me down the hallway, the air thick with smoke and adrenaline. Every sound felt magnified, the heavy boots, the echo of distant shouts, the sharp crack of glass breaking somewhere close. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. When we reached the end of the corridor, another explosion rocked the house, throwing both of us off balance. The man cursed under his breath, steadying me before shoving open a hidden door behind a tapestry. Go, he said. There's a tunnel that leads to the stables. Wait there until... He never finished. A gunshot split the air, and he fell forward, the impact jerking me backward with a scream I didn't even realize was mine. I turned, and through the smoke I saw a figure. tall, masked, a gun raised and glinting under the dim light. Before I could move, another shot rang out, this one closer, louder, final. The masked man dropped, and behind him stood Adrian, his face streaked with rain and blood, his eyes burning with something wild. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, reaching for me. I shook my head, trembling. "What's happening?" "They found us," he said grimly. "Marconi's men. Someone betrayed us." The words felt distant, unreal, as he pulled me toward him, shielding me from the chaos outside. "We have to go," he said, and before I could protest, he had me wrapped in his coat, his arm firm around my waist, guiding me through the smoke and fire. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the sound of rain echoing faintly above us. I could hear his breathing, steady and controlled, and mine, ragged and uneven. When we finally emerged into the open air behind the stables, the world felt surreal. Dark fields stretching endlessly, the sky split by lightning, and the faint glow of flames in the distance where the house had been. He stopped, turning to face me, his eyes fierce and unyielding. "Listen to me," he said. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe, but from this moment on, nothing will ever be the same, you understand?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did. "Adrian, your house, everything." He shook his head, a small, bitter smile ghosting across his lips. "It's just brick and blood. I can build it again, but not you, never you." And in that instant, as the fire consumed the empire he'd built, and the rain washed ash from his skin, I understood what he meant. That love, real love, is born not in peace but in ruin, and that somewhere between the gunfire and the smoke, the devil had made me a promise I wasn't sure I wanted but couldn't bear to refuse. The sky that morning was still bruised from the night before, swollen with the smoke of what had burned and the grief of what couldn't be saved. And as I stood beside Adrian in the gray half-light, I realized that destruction has its own kind of silence, an eerie, aching hush that settles after chaos, not because the world is calm, but because it's too stunned to remember how to move. The mansion that had felt like a cage yesterday was now a graveyard of stone and flame, and the man beside me, the man who had ruled this place with unshakable precision, looked less like a king and more like a soldier who had outlived his own war. We'd spent the rest of the night in hiding, waiting in the cold barn that smelled of rain and gunpowder, the sounds of the gunfight fading until only the rain remained, soft and endless, like a requiem. When dawn came, Adrian had said nothing. He'd only stepped outside, his jaw tight, his shoulders squared against the wind, his black coat streaked with ash. I watched him for a long time before following, each step heavy with the weight of unspoken questions. Now, as the first weak rays of sunlight touched the field, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady, the sound of a man holding the last pieces of himself together. "It was Matteo," he said, barely more than a whisper, but the name landed like a blade between us. He was the one who gave them the location, my second in command, the man I trusted most. I didn't know what to say. There was something almost cruel about betrayal. It never comes from the enemy, but always from the ones you let close enough to matter. "Why would he do that?" I asked softly, though part of me already knew the answer. Adrian turned, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Money, power." Marconi offered him a share of the territories, a promise to rebuild the empire without me. "Everyone has a price, Isabella, even loyalty." "But not you," I said before I could stop myself. He gave a faint, humorless smile, the kind that hurts to look at. "Oh, I've paid mine, Bella, every day." There was so much I wanted to ask him, about the war he'd inherited, about the man he might have been before blood and loyalty had carved him into something else. But before I could, one of his men approached, limping slightly, his face grim beneath the layer of soot. "Boss?" he said, nodding toward the distant road. They took the southern docks. We've lost everything from there to the warehouses. Mateo's men have joined them. Adrian's silence was answer enough. The man nodded once and left, and I could see it then. The empire he had built, brick by brick, trust by trust, falling apart in the space of a single night. "Adrian," I said, stepping closer, "what happens now?" He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the man behind the legend. The exhaustion, the loss, the quiet fury. "Now?" he repeated, almost to himself. "Now we start again, or we burn what's left." The words sounded like a promise, but the way he said them made me wonder if he even cared which it would be. We left the ruins later that morning, the car cutting through the wet dirt road that wound down from the estate like a scar. I sat beside him in silence, the smell of smoke clinging to my hair, the memory of fire still behind my eyes. He drove without speaking, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but his hands, steady, sure, deadly hands, tightened on the steering wheel every time the wind carried the faintest echo of sirens. Hours passed, though I couldn't say how many. The city appeared slowly, rising from the mist like a secret being remembered. He took us through side streets, down alleys that smelled of rain and rust, until we reached a warehouse by the docks, unremarkable, empty, forgotten. Inside, a few of his surviving men were already waiting, their faces drawn and pale, the silence between them heavy with loss. One of them, a younger man with haunted eyes, handed Adrian a phone. "We intercepted their communication," he said. "They're moving fast. They've already taken your accounts in Milan and Geneva. The rest will follow." Adrian took the phone, staring at it for a moment before tossing it onto the table, the motion sharp, controlled, but his voice when he spoke was quiet, almost calm. "Let them have it." The room stilled. "Boss?" "You heard me," he said. "The money, the properties, the accounts, they can have it all. I don't care." I turned toward him, startled. "You can't mean that. That's your empire." He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that frightened me. Not rage, not despair, but clarity. "An empire built on blood is never really yours," he said softly. "It just rents your soul until you can't tell the difference between what you own and what owns you." No one spoke after that. Later, when the others left, Adrian sat at the table, his head bowed, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. I hesitated, then crossed the room, sitting across from him. "You're giving up everything," I said quietly. "For me." He didn't deny it. "It's already gone," he said. "All I can do now is make sure they don't take you too. You don't have to do this." He lifted his gaze and I saw the steel return to his eyes. "I do. Because if they touch you, if they even try, then everything I've done, everything I've become, means nothing." There was something about the way he said it, so certain, so final, that left me breathless. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't worth it, that saving me wasn't salvation. It was another wound he'd never heal, but the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, I knew he'd already made his choice. That night, as the city slept under a blanket of fog, Adrian called a meeting. Only 4 men came, what was left of the army that once answered to his name. They sat in a circle of dim light, their faces grim, their loyalty unquestioned even now. He told them to disappear, to take their families and leave, to start new lives under new names. "You owe me nothing," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I won't rebuild this time." They argued, of course, swore their loyalty, but he silenced them with a look. "You served me with honor," he said. "Now live with it." When they were gone, he stood by the window, staring out at the lights across the harbor. I walked to him, drawn by something I couldn't explain, and when I spoke, my voice trembled. "You're destroying everything you've built." He turned toward me, and for the first time his expression was completely unguarded. "I built it for the wrong reasons," he said. "Power, revenge, fear. But when I saw you in that club, when I saw what I'd become through your eyes, I knew I couldn't live in it anymore." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "And what will you live for now?" He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with a tenderness that felt like it could undo the world. "For something I thought I'd forgotten how to feel," he whispered. "For peace. For love. For you." I didn't know how to answer. The part of me that should have run, that should have hated him for everything he'd done, had gone quiet. In its place was something deeper, something terrifyingly real. Because beneath the violence and the darkness, I saw the truth. Adrian DeLuca wasn't a man trying to save me. He was a man trying to save himself. The sound of the rain had returned, soft against the windows, steady and unbroken. And in that fragile silence, he leaned forward, his forehead resting lightly against mine, his voice barely audible. "The Empire's gone," he said, "but you're still here. And as long as you are, I'll keep fighting." I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his breath, the steady rhythm of his heart. And for the first time since the night I met him, I wasn't sure who was saving whom. Outside, the city began to wake, unaware that somewhere on its edge, a king had just burned his crown and chosen love over legacy. But even as I held on to him, I couldn't shake the shadow that lingered at the edge of my thoughts, the knowledge that empires don't die quietly, and men like Adrian aren't allowed to walk away without the past coming back to claim its debt. The morning that followed was too still, too fragile, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether what we had done, what he had done, would break or hold. And I remember thinking that silence can be more frightening than chaos, because chaos at least moves, at least lets you know you're alive. The fog outside hung heavy over the docks, wrapping everything in a dull gray that seemed to swallow the horizon whole. And as I stood at the cracked window of that forgotten warehouse, watching the faint outlines of ships move through the mist, I wondered how long we could pretend that this small, stolen moment of peace would last before the world came to collect its due. Adrian hadn't slept. I could see it in the faint hollows beneath his eyes, in the stiffness of his movements, in the way his hands clenched unconsciously whenever a car passed too close outside. He'd spent the night on the phone, calling in favors from people I suspected owed him more than money, his voice low and controlled, speaking in that mixture of Italian and English that felt less like language and more like command. But when dawn came, he had grown quiet again, his energy replaced by something harder, colder, like he was gathering what remained of himself before the storm broke again. He was sitting now on the edge of the table, his sleeves rolled up, a faint bruise darkening along his jaw where he must have taken a hit during the attack. There was something haunting about him in the morning light. This man who had once ruled entire cities now reduced to a fugitive hiding in his own territory. Yet even in ruin, he looked unbroken. A contradiction I would never stop trying to understand. "Adrian," I said softly, afraid to disturb the fragile calm between us. "What happens now?" He lifted his gaze slowly, his expression unreadable, the weight of sleepless nights shadowing his face. "Now," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we disappear." "Disappear?" I repeated, crossing my arms as though it could hold me together. "And go where?" "Somewhere they can't find us." "But they will," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "Men like Marconi don't stop. They'll hunt you until there's nothing left to take." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like resignation dressed in irony. "Then they'll have to kill me twice." There was no fear in his tone, only quiet defiance, and it terrified me more than the threats outside ever could, because I knew what that kind of certainty meant. It meant he had already decided how this would end. I walked toward him, the floor cold beneath my bare feet, and when I spoke again, my voice trembled. You can't keep fighting them forever, Adrian. You've already lost too much. The house, your men, everything you built. It's gone. What more can they take? He stood then, his height forcing me to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, and the look there stole the breath from my chest. They can take you, he said quietly, and that's the one thing I won't let happen. Before I could respond, before I could tell him that love built on fear is just another kind of prison, a sharp knock echoed through the warehouse. 3 short raps, deliberate, familiar. Adrian's body stiffened instantly. His hand went to the gun at his hip as he moved toward the door with the lethal grace of a man who has lived too long in danger. Stay behind me, he murmured, and I obeyed, because even though part of me wanted to run, another part knew that there was no place left to go that he wouldn't follow. He opened the door cautiously, the early morning light spilling across the cracked floor, revealing a man I didn't recognize. He was older, his hair silver at the temples, his suit rain-soaked, his face drawn but calm. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like something far worse, someone who belonged to the kind of quiet power that doesn't need guns to kill. Adrian, the man said, his tone almost gentle, though his eyes held none of it. You've made quite the mess. Adrian's grip on the door tightened. I told you never to come here. And yet here I am, the man replied, stepping inside uninvited, brushing droplets of rain from his sleeve. You burned down your own house, disbanded your empire, and now half the city's bleeding because of it. Marconi's taken everything that used to be yours. You think you can vanish and leave the rest of us to clean up what's left? Who the hell are you? I demanded, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The man turned toward me, his expression softening slightly, though it felt more like mockery than kindness. You must be the reason then, he said, the reason the king threw away his crown. Adrian's voice dropped to a low growl. Watch your mouth. The man lifted a hand in surrender, but the faint smirk never left his face. Relax. I didn't come to fight. I came to tell you the truth. Marconi's not stopping Adrian. He's already moving south. He'll take the docks, then the city, then your name. And when he's finished, he'll come for her. I know, Adrian said quietly. Then you know what you have to do. For a long moment, silence filled the room, the air thick enough to choke on. Adrian's jaw worked, his expression unreadable, but I could feel it. The shift, the weight of a decision he didn't want to make but already had. When the man left, the sound of the door closing felt final, like the last page of a chapter I wasn't ready to end. What did he mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Adrian didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, his hand still resting on the frame. When he finally turned to face me, something inside him had changed. He's right, he said, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I have to finish this. No, I said, shaking my head. No, Adrian, you can't go after him. You'll die. He took a step closer, his gaze steady, unwavering. Then I'll die fighting, but I won't run. Not again. I grabbed his arm, desperate. You don't have to do this. You said yourself that the Empire doesn't matter anymore. You gave it up. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The war between duty and desire, love and vengeance, all crashing behind his eyes like waves against stone. You don't understand, he said softly. It's not about the Empire anymore. It's about what comes after. If I don't end this, he'll never stop. He'll hunt you, and I'll have to live knowing I brought that to your door. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. And if you die, what do I live with then? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and brushed his fingers along my cheek, his touch so gentle it hurt. "You live free," he said. "That's all I ever wanted for you." I shook my head, choking back the words that wanted to spill out. "Don't do this. Please." He leaned in then, his lips finding mine in a kiss that felt like both a promise and a goodbye, slow and desperate, full of everything we hadn't said. When he pulled back, his voice was rough, raw. "I have to, Isabella, because loving you means I can't let you be afraid." And before I could stop him, before I could say anything that might have changed his mind, he was gone. The hours that followed were a blur. The sound of engines fading into the distance, the rain returning in steady sheets, the warehouse growing colder and emptier with every minute he was gone. I sat there, wrapped in one of his coats, listening to the storm, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in that he'd come back. But as the sky darkened again and the first distant thunder rolled across the water, a different sound joined it. The low, echoing boom of an explosion somewhere far away, faint but unmistakable. The kind of sound that means the end has already begun. I stood, my heart racing, my body trembling with the horrible certainty that whatever had just happened, it was Adrian's doing. Or his undoing. And as the rain began to fall harder, blurring the city lights into nothing but streaks of gold and gray, I realized the truth I'd been trying not to face. Love hadn't saved him. It had only given him something worth dying for. When the explosion tore through the night, it was not the sound itself that broke me, but the silence that followed. The heavy, suffocating stillness that always comes after something irreversible, when the world seems to hold its breath in disbelief, unsure whether to mourn or to rage. I stood frozen by the cracked window of the warehouse, staring out at the faint glow on the horizon, orange and flickering, rising like the ghost of everything that had been lost. And though I didn't know for certain where the blast had come from, I knew, deep in that cold, trembling part of myself that had learned what it meant to love a man like Adrian, that he was there. Wherever fire burned, wherever blood was being spilled, he was always there. The minutes stretched into hours, though time had lost meaning. The rain had stopped, leaving behind only the sharp scent of smoke carried on the wind, and I remember pacing the length of that empty room, listening for the sound of footsteps, of engines, of anything that meant he was alive. Every shadow became a threat, every silence a curse, until at last the door burst open. And he was there, covered in blood and ash, his shirt torn, his face bruised, but his eyes still burning with that same impossible fire that refused to die. I ran to him without thinking, my hands trembling as I reached for his face, afraid to touch him, afraid that if I did, he would vanish like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from. "You're hurt," I whispered, my voice breaking, but he caught my wrists gently, shaking his head. "It's not mine," he said, though his voice was raw, strained, heavy with exhaustion. "What happened?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. He sank onto the edge of the table, his breath uneven, his hands stained with someone else's life. "It's done," he said quietly. "Marconi's gone. His men are scattering. The rest will fall in line or run." For a moment, the words didn't register. "It's done." They sounded too final, too simple for something that must have cost so much. But when I looked at him, really looked, I saw it. The toll. The tremor in his hands, the hollow in his eyes, the weight of the lives he'd taken and the empire he'd buried with his own hands. "You killed him," I said, not as an accusation, but as a realization, a truth too heavy to hold. Adrian didn't look away. "Yes." "Why?" He let out a slow breath, the kind that carries years of pain in its wake. "Because he wouldn't stop. Because he took everything from me, my men, my home, my peace. Because if I didn't end it, he would have come for you next." There was no pride in his voice, no triumph, only weariness, the kind that lives in men who've seen too much of death and too little of mercy. I wanted to hate him in that moment. I wanted to scream at him for choosing blood again, for proving that no matter what he said, no matter what promises he made, this world would always pull him back. But instead, I found myself sinking to my knees in front of him, my hands resting lightly on his knees, my heart breaking with a kind of tenderness I didn't understand. "You can't keep doing this," I whispered. "You can't keep killing pieces of yourself and calling it protection." He looked down at me, his expression torn between fury and despair. "You think I wanted this?" he asked softly. "You think I wanted any of it?" I tried to leave Isabella. I tried to let it go, but men like me, we don't get to walk away clean. We just trade one kind of sin for another. I shook my head, tears burning hot against my skin. "You could have run. We could have left together." His hands came up to cradle my face, rough and trembling, and when he spoke, his voice was a broken confession. "Run where? To what? I don't have a name outside of this. I don't have a life that isn't built on the bones of what I've done. And you—" His voice faltered, the words catching like smoke. "You deserve something better than the ruin I carry." "Then let me decide what I deserve," I said fiercely, my hands gripping his shirt, feeling the thud of his heartbeat beneath my fingers. "Because whether you believe it or not, you've already become part of me. I can't pretend I don't love you, Adrian. I can't unsee who you are or what you've done, or the man you try to be when you think no one's watching. I know it's wrong, I know it's impossible, but it's real. And I'd rather have that for one moment than spend a lifetime running from it." For a long time, he didn't speak. He just stared at me, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to find the part of me that still believed in forgiveness. Then slowly he leaned forward until his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm and uneven against my lips. "You don't understand what you're saying," he murmured. "You don't know what it means to love someone who's damned." "I don't care," I said, my voice shaking but sure. "I'm already halfway to hell with you." Something inside him broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like the sound of a lock turning after too many years. His lips found mine, desperate and trembling, and the kiss tasted of smoke and salt and sorrow. When he pulled away, there were tears on his face, though he didn't seem to notice. "I never believed in love," he said softly. "Not until you. But love isn't enough to wash away what I've done." "Then stop trying to wash it away," I whispered. "Just let it live beside you." He smiled faintly, a sad, beautiful thing that hurt to see. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," I said, "but neither is dying for it." For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that only comes after truth has been spoken aloud. The rain had started again, soft and rhythmic, the sound of a world trying to cleanse itself. Adrian's head fell back against the wall, his eyes closing, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked human. Just a man, stripped of the power and the legend, sitting in the ruins of his choices with nothing left but the woman who refused to leave him. I don't know how long we stayed like that, wrapped in a quiet that felt almost sacred. But eventually, he spoke again, his voice low and hesitant, as if confessing something to the dark. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. I lifted my head, my pulse quickening. "What is it?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the door as though expecting ghosts. "Before Marconi died, he told me something. Something about your father." My heart stopped. "What about him?" Adrian's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his words came slowly, each one heavy with reluctance. "Your father wasn't killed because he betrayed my family. He died because he tried to protect someone. Me." The room tilted, the air thickening until I could barely breathe. "What?" "He found out what my father planned to do," Adrian said, his voice low and rough. "He tried to warn me, tried to stop it. Marconi's men caught him before he could. My father covered it up to protect the family's name, told everyone it was a failed job. I was too young, too blind to see the truth. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking like stones into the pit of my stomach. You mean, my father died because of your family, because of you? Adrian's eyes met mine, dark and unflinching. Yes. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood, stepping back, my chest tight, my thoughts spiraling into something sharp and chaotic. And you knew, I said, my voice breaking. You knew who I was the whole time. I didn't know the truth then, he said quickly, standing as well. I swear, Isabella, I didn't. Not until Marconi told me last night. I needed to tell you before you heard it from someone else. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. You killed for me, Adrian. You destroyed everything for me. And all along, I was just the daughter of the man your family murdered. He took a step closer, his voice raw. You're not your father's sins, Isabella, just like I'm not my father's legacy. I need you to believe that. But I couldn't. Not yet. The truth was too heavy, too cruel. I turned away, the tears finally spilling, the storm outside matching the one rising inside me. Behind me, Adrian's voice broke through the rain, soft and certain. You can hate me if you need to. But understand this. I will spend the rest of my life making it right, even if it kills me. And as I stood there, trembling, staring at the door I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted to walk through, I realized that love had never been our salvation. It was our undoing, our punishment, our truth. The days after Adrian's confession passed like slow-moving storms, unpredictable, suffocating, and heavy with the kind of silence that isn't peace but paralysis, the kind where every word feels dangerous, every glance a battlefield, every breath a reminder of what was said and what can never be unsaid. I didn't leave the warehouse. I didn't have the strength. The world beyond those rusted walls had always been dangerous, but inside, it had become unbearable in a different way. There, danger had a name, and that name was truth. He tried to give me space, though I could feel him everywhere. The lingering scent of his cologne on the sheets, the faint echo of his footsteps pacing the floor at night, the coffee he still made for me each morning and left untouched on the table before disappearing into whatever dark corners he occupied until sunset. I wanted to hate him for what he had done, for the secrets he had kept, for the blood that tied my father's death to his life. But hate was too clean, too simple. What I felt was something far more complicated, a storm made of grief and longing and betrayal, twisting inside me with nowhere to go. I replayed every moment between us, every touch, every glance, every promise, searching for the lie, trying to see when love had become deception. Had it been there from the beginning, hidden behind that quiet intensity that had always made me feel both safe and trapped? Or had it crept in later, when the truth became too heavy to carry, and he decided that silence was the lesser sin? I wanted to ask him, but I didn't. I didn't trust what my voice might sound like if I did. It wasn't until the fourth night that I found him again, standing outside by the water, his back to me, the city lights casting a faint glow over the edge of the docks. He looked almost otherworldly like that, his white shirt open at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, his hands braced on the railing, his reflection fractured by the rippling water below. He didn't turn when he heard me. Maybe he already knew I was there. Maybe he had been waiting. You shouldn't be out here alone, I said, though the words sounded strange in the air, hollow and too small for what I meant. He didn't look at me. Neither should you. For a long moment, I said nothing. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and smoke, the memory of fire never quite leaving us. Finally, I took a step closer, my voice barely more than a whisper. You should have told me the truth. He let out a slow, tired breath. I know. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I didn't know how to tell you without losing you. You lost me anyway. That made him turn, and when he did, his face looked older somehow. Not in years, but in weight. Like the truth had carved new lines into him that hadn't been there before. I didn't want to lie to you, he said quietly. I just wanted to protect you. I almost laughed then, though it came out broken, trembling. Protect me? My father died trying to protect you, Adrian. And now you stand here and say the same thing as if protection is anything but another word for control. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. You think that's what this is? What else could it be? I demanded, stepping closer now, anger burning through the ache. You saved me, yes, but you also took me. You made choices for me, built walls around me, told yourself it was love, but love doesn't cage people. It doesn't bury the truth to keep them close. He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've forgotten how to love the way normal people do. But you have to understand. I was raised in a world where love was just another weapon. You love someone, you make them a target. You let them in. You hand them your weakness. I never learned how to be gentle with what I cared for, Isabella. All I knew was how to protect it, even if I had to destroy myself to do it. The wind caught the ends of my hair, tangling it around my face, and when I pushed it back, I realized my hands were shaking. And what happens now? I asked. Now that everything's out in the open, now that I know the truth, do you still think you can protect me from this world you built? He turned back toward the water, his gaze fixed on the black expanse beyond the docks. There's only one way to make sure you're safe, he said quietly. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. What do you mean? I have to finish what my father started, he said. I have to erase what's left of it, all of it. The businesses, the accounts, the people who still wear the DeLuca name like a crown. If I don't, they'll never stop coming. You can't just erase it, I said, the panic creeping into my voice. You can't undo a lifetime of blood. He looked at me then, and his eyes, those dark, endless eyes, were steady, resolute. No, he said softly, but I can make sure it ends with me. It took a moment for the words to sink in, and when they did, it felt like the world tilted beneath my feet. You're going to kill yourself, I whispered. I'm going to make sure no one else dies because of me. I shook my head, stepping back. No, you don't get to decide that. You don't get to leave me with that. His voice cracked, almost imperceptibly. I already left too much with you, Isabella. You carry my sins now, whether you want to or not. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to beg him to stop talking like a man who'd already buried himself. But before I could, the sound of an engine cut through the air. A low, distant rumble growing closer. Adrian stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the gun at his side. What is it? I whispered. He didn't answer at first. Then slowly he said, They found us. My heart lurched. Marconi's men? He shook his head. No, someone worse. The rest of the syndicate. The ones who think I broke the code. They want what's left of the Empire, and they'll take you to get it. The headlights appeared then, cutting through the mist. 3 black cars gliding down the narrow road like sharks slicing through dark water. Adrian grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the warehouse. Go inside, he ordered. I'm not leaving you. Damn it, Isabella. He stopped, gripping my face in both hands, his eyes wild now. If you love me, you'll do this. Please. The word please shattered me more than any command ever could. He kissed me once, hard and desperate, then pushed me toward the door. I stumbled backward, the cold metal handle pressing against my palm, and before I could move, he turned, walking toward the oncoming cars, his figure swallowed by the fog and the glow of the approaching lights. The first car stopped. The doors opened. Shadows spilled out. Men in suits, silent and deliberate. I couldn't hear their words, only see the outline of Adrian standing before them, his head held high, his hand hovering near his gun, but never raising it. For a single, breathless moment, everything went still. Then the world erupted. Gunfire tore through the air, sharp and unrelenting, the sound echoing across the docks like thunder. I screamed his name, but the sound was lost in the chaos. Sparks flew from the cars, flashes of light breaking through the fog, the metallic scent of blood and smoke filling the air until I couldn't tell where he ended and the violence began. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The fog thickened, swallowing the scene, hiding everything but the faint outline of bodies on the ground. "Adrian," I whispered, stepping forward, my voice breaking on his name. No answer. The mist shifted, revealing a figure moving toward me. Slowly, unsteadily. My heart leapt, hope and dread colliding inside me. But as he stepped into the light, I saw it wasn't Adrian at all. It was one of the men, his face pale, blood staining his collar. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, his voice hoarse. He said, "To tell you," the man coughed, spitting red onto the ground. He said, "He chose you." And then he fell. I ran forward, through the fog, through the smoke, through the ruin, screaming his name again and again, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice, raw and broken, carried away by the wind. There are moments in life that do not end so much as they unravel, slow and merciless, pulling at the fragile threads that hold you together until you are left standing in the wreckage of everything you thought you understood, watching it slip away, powerless to stop it. That was how it felt the night the gunfire stopped, when the fog swallowed the docks, and I realized that silence was no longer a reprieve, but a verdict. The world had gone still, not peaceful, not calm, but hollow, like the earth itself was holding its breath to mourn what had been lost. I don't remember running. I only remember the sound of my heart, wild and desperate, pounding in my ears as I stumbled through the smoke, my hands trembling, my voice breaking as I called his name again and again, until it became nothing more than a raw whisper scraping against the night. The mist was thick, heavy with the metallic scent of blood, and the ground beneath me was slick, uneven, alive with the ghosts of violence. Shapes moved and fell around me, but I saw none of them, heard none of them, only the faint echo of his voice in my mind, low and steady, saying, "If you love me, you'll do this. Please." And then I saw him. He was lying near the water, half shrouded by the fog, his body twisted slightly as though he'd fallen reaching for something, or someone. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes saw. He was Adrian DeLuca, the man who had survived ambushes, betrayals, wars. He was strength and fury and control made flesh. He wasn't supposed to fall. But as I dropped to my knees beside him, the truth pressed itself against me, cruel and undeniable. His eyes were open, unfocused, but not lifeless. When I touched his face, he blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if dragging himself back from somewhere far away, just to look at me one last time. "I told you to stay inside," he whispered, his voice faint but steady, threaded with that same impossible calm he carried even at the edge of death. "And you told me you'd come back," I said, the words breaking on a sob. "You lied." His lips curved, just slightly, and the ghost of a smile passed through the pain. "I didn't lie. I came back. Just not the way you wanted." I pressed my hands against his chest, against the warmth already fading beneath my fingers, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to stop the inevitable as if sheer will could hold his life in place. "Don't talk like that," I said. "Don't you dare talk like that, you promised me." He lifted a trembling hand and brushed his thumb across my cheek, smearing blood and tears together. "I promised I'd protect you," he murmured. "And I did." I shook my head, choking on the flood of words that refused to come out right. "Not like this, Adrian. Not like this. You can't leave me here." "I have to," he said, his breath catching, his voice thinner now, slipping between us like smoke. "If I stay, it never ends. They'll keep coming. They'll keep taking. But if I die now, it stops. The debts are paid." "No," I whispered fiercely, pressing my forehead to his. "You don't get to die and call it redemption. You don't get to make peace by leaving me behind." He laughed then, soft and broken, the sound barely audible over the soft rush of water against the docks. "You always were too brave for me," he said, his words trembling with something like awe. "Too alive. That's what I loved about you." I wanted to tell him that love wasn't supposed to hurt like this, that it wasn't supposed to taste like blood and ash, that it wasn't supposed to end in the same silence where it began. But all that came out was his name, again and again, like a prayer, like a curse. His eyes flickered, his breathing shallower now, each inhale a battle he was slowly losing. "Isabella," he said, and the sound of my name in his voice, ragged, reverent, dying, broke something deep inside me that would never heal. "Listen to me. You have to leave. You have to go and never look back. Promise me." "I can't," I said, shaking my head. "I can't live in a world that doesn't have you in it." He smiled faintly, his thumb tracing one last line along my jaw. "Then live for the part of me that loved you," he whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." And then his hand fell away. The world tilted, the fog closing in. The sound of my sobs swallowed by the steady lapping of the water against the pier. I called his name one last time, but he didn't answer. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was final. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours, maybe days. Time had lost all shape. When the sun rose, pale and indifferent, it painted his face in gold, turning death into something almost gentle. I touched his cheek one last time, memorizing the feel of his skin beneath my fingertips, the stillness where once there had been fire. And then I did what he asked. I walked away. The city felt foreign without him. The noise, the light, the motion of people who didn't know that somewhere on the edge of it all, a man had died trying to build peace from the ruins of his own darkness. I disappeared into it, like he had taught me. Different name, different place, different life. For months I said nothing to anyone. I didn't tell them who he was or what he'd done. I didn't speak his name. It felt too sacred, too dangerous, like saying it out loud might call him back from wherever he had gone, and I couldn't bear to see him broken again. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and I hear the faint hum of the city in the distance, I can still feel him beside me. The weight of his hand on my back, the warmth of his breath against my neck, the sound of his voice saying my name like it meant something worth dying for. And I realize that maybe love doesn't die when the body does. Maybe it lingers, haunting the spaces where it once lived. Too stubborn to fade. Too proud to surrender. I think about him when it rains, the way the water used to fall against his skin, the way he always said storms were the only time he could breathe because the sky sounded like his soul. I think about him when I pass the docks and see the rippling water, remembering the way it looked that night, black and endless, swallowing our sins whole. I think about him when I catch my reflection in glass and see not the frightened girl he saved, but the woman he left behind. Stronger, colder, and yet somehow still soft enough to ache. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear his voice again. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a promise that never really left me. You live for the part of me that loved you. So I do. I live quietly, simply, carrying his name not as a curse but as a compass, guiding me towards something he never found. Peace. I tend to a small garden behind the old house I've made my home, and sometimes, when the flowers bloom, I imagine him there beside me, his hands in the soil, his eyes softened by the kind of gentleness he was never allowed to show in life. I talk to him then, not expecting answers, just letting the words fill the air between us like forgiveness. And though the world has forgotten the name Adrian DeLuca, I have not. Because I knew the man beneath the legend, the one who gave up a kingdom for a heartbeat, the one who found redemption not in power but in surrender. He taught me that love doesn't save us. It exposes us, strips us bare, demands that we look at the truth and choose it anyway. He taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on, but letting go. I still wear the necklace he gave me, the one with the small silver cross that once belonged to his mother. It hangs close to my heart, over the place where his memory lives, steady and quiet. A reminder that even the darkest hearts can find light when they learn how to love. And on nights when the wind rises and the sea hums like it did the night he died, I walk to the edge of the cliff overlooking the water and whisper into the darkness, "You chose me." Because in the end, that's what love is, not the empire, not the power, not the blood spilled or the promises broken, but the choice. The moment when one soul, ruined and beautiful and human, looks at another and says, "You, even if it destroys me, you." That was the heart he chose. And somehow, even in his absence, it still beats inside me.